We're going to continue the Ramak's Pshat on this Mishnah. So just to recap where we are. We've started with the first Mishnah in Sefer Yetzirah, but it's really technically the third Mishnah. First Mishnah that talks about the 10 Spheres, which is the Mishnah that says, Eses Spheres B'lima, Mispar Eser Etzbois, Chomesh Kneget Chomesh, Uvris Yochid Mchvenes Be'emtza, B'milas Loshan, V'milas Moir. Now, Ramak explained the first part of this Mishnah as sort of giving a definition of 10 spheres being a number, although they're unlimited, so belima, without a defined essence, without a known or knowable essence. And then we somewhat got stuck in, and we're just going to be clear that this is a sort of getting stuck, it's not really relevant, is in the Chomesh Kneged Chomesh. So we explained that the 5 and 5 is trying to prove that amount or the concept of 10 spheres from the idea of the hands, from the psukim that describe the world being created by God's hands, and Chomesh Keneged Chomesh to him proves that it's not 10, it's not 20 or 5, because these 5 have a connection with each other by the bris which connects them, which we'll see exactly what that means, which doesn't exist between the 10 hand fingers and the 10 fingers on your foot. So that's the proof, and that's the basic his basic explanation of the Mishnah. Now, the thing that he's working on now, and which really doesn't entirely belong here, if he would really redo the book and write it in the order of trying to prove or to show the basics and then to move on to more elaborate things, he would probably put this in a later shar, which maybe shar Sedra Sfiris, or talking about a different question, really. It's not really such a question, it's not a basic question, but we're doing his order, so we have to work through this. So now that the Sefer Yetzirah said there's Chomesh Keneged Chomesh, so of course we can ask, and I think this is a fair question, if the point of Chomesh Keneged Chomesh is what he said in his first pshat, that this is Lachriya Chachmas Eses Firas, to prove that it's not 10 or it's not 20 or 5. So wouldn't that be enough? Why would we need to continue and say that after all of that, the Spheres themselves are somehow divided into 5 and 5? It's not clear to me that he needs this whole piece, because after his explanation of the Mishnah, that it's trying to prove the existence of 10 Spheres by this whole pshatel with the psukim that says Masetz Besecha Shemaim, Yemini Yes Teretz, and the other psukim that say Shemecha Masetz Besecha, and so on, seems to be enough. It doesn't seem to be, if that's what the Mishnah means, then it's not clear that we need it actually to mean anything more. But for some reason he assumes, and I'm not really sure why right now, so we have to think why, but he assumes that it's also true that there is 5 and 5, and really technically the reason is because his answer to the question of why 5 and 5 become 110 and 10 and 10 don't become 20 is that the Shemaim and Uretz, which probably correspond to whatever he's going to divide the 5 and 5 here, are 5 and 5 spheres. In other words, that's why, the way he understands it, and like I said, it's not the way the Ravid, which he sort of is building on, understands it. But he understands it as saying the Shemaim were created with 5 fingers, and the Uretz was created with another 5 fingers, and therefore he has to explain, since these fingers to him are corresponding or signifying the spheres, so he has to explain which spheres are the 5 and 5. But there's still a question here, which is that this whole thing might not be needed. But in any case, him and all the earlier Mefarshim assume that there is some sort of thing in the spheres which are 5 and 5, right? And in the basic sense, we discussed that there are 3 different ways in which he explains this. And this whole question, you could frame this whole question as sort of a distraction. It's not really needed. All we need here is to sort of prove the existence of the spheres and go to their earlier source, which is Sefer Yetzirah. But all of this is just once the way he learned it. Once he's learning a Mishnah, he has to learn it until the end. So that's what he's doing. Now, to get back to where we are, there he had three different, three basic readings of it, 2 which are part of one reading, have 2 different ways. One way is to understand that Chomesh Keneged Chomesh, there is the spheres are divided into 2 sets, 5 and 5, one of which is one kind of sphere, the other one is another kind of sphere, and they're against each other, so 2 kinds of spheres. And the second way, which he likes better for some reason, and we'll get to later, probably not today, is that there are 5 different Brisos, 5 different machriim between the spheres, which we'll have to discuss at length. That's his way of understanding. So according to him, it's not really talking about any of this. But according to what the Mefarshim said, this is what it's talking about. And then there were 2 different ways of doing it. One was to divide the spheres in half and say the first top half is the top half and the bottom half is the bottom half. That was one pshat, and it's brought under Ravid and other Mefarshim. The second pshat was to divide them what we call left and right, to say that 5 spheres are chesed, 5 spheres are gvura, and divide it that way. Okay? Now, just to be clear, all of this has not very much to do with the hands and the fingers anymore, right? Because these 5 and 5 don't entirely correspond, like in what he said earlier, that according to the Ramak, the Sefer Yetzirah is not really associating the 10 fingers of a human body with the 10 spheres here, because he said if that would be the case, then he would have. The Ramak has this question, which I don't really understand, but his question is if that would be the case, he should have given you the whole description of the human body corresponding to spheres, which the Ramak says I've written about in Shara Neshama and Perek Ches. He goes it through at length in different Ramazim or different associations of the human body with the spheres, because a person is created with Tzelem Elohim. But that's, according to him, not what the Sefer Yetzirah is interested here. And actually, if you look over there and ask Ramak what the 5 fingers and 5 fingers of a person's hand are associated with, he's going to have a different pshat. None of these 3 pshatim. So it seems like he thinks that this is a totally different discussion, totally different question. Question that he has here is how to divide the spheres, since we got the spheres from the idea of 2 hands, but as of now he's totally abstracted it from that and just talking about 5 and 5 and what kind of different 5 and 5s are there, right? So the first pshat, and I'm just hazarding to be clear, the first pshat was that there's 5 top spheres and 5 bottom spheres. The Ramak says, this is pshat that's brought in earlier Mefarshim, the Ramak personal opinion is that while the actual separation of spheres into a top half and a bottom half is true, and true for him means that it's brought in the Zohar in certain ways, not exactly in the same way, but in a certain way we do have this. And I will add that the Arizal also has this separation in a certain way, at least. It's important for him to talk about, and he also quotes different Zohars that say this. It's important for him to talk about the difference between the top part, or what he calls Chagat, and the bottom part, which we call Nahi, or other ways of dividing that, but he does divide the spheres at the Teferet in many different situations, in many different contexts, and sees that as an important thing. But the Ramak does not think, number one, he does not think that their explanation is correct. So the explanation that he quotes from these Mefarshim, which I've not entirely seen, I have to look up who exactly it was, said that this is so in order to lead or to control the upper worlds are the 5 upper spheres, and to lead the lower worlds as the 5 bottom spheres. And the Ramak disagrees with this. According to him, that's not how it works. But there's still such a difference. So it's not the meaning, but it's the difference is true. So in any case, this is true. Now, the second chat we'll get to, but now we have to figure out another part of this, which is very tricky the way he does it, right? Now we have to figure out how to actually read this Mishnah according to this pshat, right? In other words, we know what the 5 and 5 is, but now what is bris mechavenes be'emtza? Basically, what is that saying? Right. So again, the first thing that Ramak said about this was this is sort of to prove that we should connect these 5 and not connect the 10 and the 10. Okay. But now he seems to move on from that and say that we need another pshat for this bris yochid mechavenes be'emtza. And now I will say myself, and the Ramak will say it in the end, but will tell you to hear. This bris, so if you look in Sefer Yetzirah itself, if you read through, and you should read it a bunch of times to have it sort of in your head, then it's actually a simple text. I think the basic picture of what he's saying, or the basic framework that he's working with, is pretty simple. Everyone makes things very complicated and puts in a lot of different ideas and meanings, but the basic idea of what he's saying is very simple, and you could have clarity in that. Now, the Sefer Yetzirah discusses, uses the word bris in several different ways, in several different contexts. First thing, and let's just try to be clear. Sefer Yetzirah, in the first perek of Sefer Yetzirah, has the word bris 2 times, right? If I just take a search, I'll see that. Right, he talks about, and then in the 7th, that's the only time we have the bris in the rest, and then in the 6th chapter he has bris again. Now, what do I mean by this? The Sefer Yetzirah talks about the Krisas Bris. That's in Mishnah Ches, says, Valduva Zen Nichras Bris. Actually, the Ramak had this language, if you remember, in the beginning. That there's only 10 and not 9. And he sort of reads that Nichras Bris going on this also, although it's in a different Mishnah. So in other words, Nichras Bris in one sense could mean, and what I understand it meaning in Mishnah Ches, right? It says, that there's a bris, in other words, a warning, an agreement, a covenant between the mekubal, right, between the person thinking about these things. Dratz libcha is choshev, he's maharer, and he's talking and thinking and discussing and analyzing this concept. And there is a bris, in other words, a very strong obligation or a very strong deal made between him and the things that he's knowing to know it in the correct way and to not make specific mistakes, maybe to not think specific thoughts which lead you into mistakes. This is one kind of bris that the Sefer Yetzirah talks about, right? Now, in other words, it seems like there's a bris. The bris that Sefer Yetzirah talks about is between the person. This is very important. I'm talking about this in general. If you're someone that's interested in studying, if you're someone who's interested in knowing the sources of things, what Sefer Yetzirah is at least for sure talking about, right? The beginnings of everything, what everything is based on, very deep or very high or very low, however you want to, whatever metaphor makes more sense, either very deep or very high levels of existence, the most basic parts of reality, which get close at least to God, or even exactly how we associate spirits and what the Sefer Yetzirah means with God, but it gets you very close. Then those things, those truths, or those levels of existence, or those spheres, or those oisias, whatever they are, will have a certain relationship with you. That means gaining a relationship with them, and this is something that we can find in the word bris. It creates a certain bris. Literally means a covenant, like basically a contract, right, or some terms of relation, and we understand it as maybe a deeper, a more human relation, a more personal relation. It means to enter into, right? We talk about entering into a bris, so entering into a community, entering into communion, maybe that's another word, with these things that we're studying. And this is very important. That's what the first Perek in Sefer Yetzirah talks about. It also requires a certain respect, a certain honor, a certain love, a certain fear. By which I mean what we call yirat harabimut, right? A certain distance, a certain taking seriously of the subject, a certain relating to it as a very real thing and as a thing that can make demands of you, right? That's very important. It can make demands of you, and if you sort of take it not seriously, if you sort of think that it's a joke, then you're not part of the bris. And maybe you make certain mistakes that show that, and so on. That then you're not part of the bris, and this is important. And it's important. The Sefer Yetzirah already has some. And Sefer Yetzirah's language is very terse and poetic and hard to entirely parse exactly what he's saying, but he definitely is at least touching these questions of what is the relation between the masig, the person getting at these things, the person researching these things, the person thinking these thoughts, and the thoughts themselves that are being thought. Really, this is another way of saying what is the relation between a person who wants to know God and God, or the godly things that he wants to know. Now, this is important. Now, the second way, and this is one, and if you would go on the last mission of Sefer Yetzirah, which might be an addition, not clear, but the last mission of Sefer Yetzirah literally says that after Avram Avinu, that's why the Sefer Yetzirah is ascribed to Avram Avinu. It says, "Kivan shetzuf Avram Avinu," and Avram Avinu knew this. V'hibet v'roa v'choka v'heven v'chokak v'chotza v'tzira v'yotza v'alsa b'yodai. So Avram Avinu went through all the levels, all the steps of understanding and working through all the concepts and all the words and all the numbers, all the spheres of Sefer Yetzirah. So this is where Avram Avinu, according to Sefer Yetzirah, Sefer Yetzirah is a manual for having the revelation that Avram Avinu had. This is the same manual for doing that, or to thinking the same thoughts that Avram Avinu thought, and he's obviously the paradigm or the father of Judaism, and also the father for what we can call internal Judaism, right? The mystical Judaism, the way in which we read the Torah. And the Sefer Yetzirah definitely is reading the Torah and reading the story of Avram Avinu, which is like a very big source for everything. Reading that in the way of the internal insight or the internal knowledge that he assumes that Torah is really about. and at least Master Beresh is the secrets of the Torah is really about. And that's what Avram Avinu was studying, although it doesn't say in the Chumash, but we have to understand this from Torah Shebal Peh or from our own understanding. And when it says, Vayomer Hashem el Avram, V'yera Hashem el Avram, and it says God made a bris with Avram, right? This is the important part. It really means he achieved these levels. He became one. He was unified. He was in communion with this knowledge, with this book, with this information. Not the information, but information as a thing that you can have a relationship with, as something that you have some bris with. And then it says, Korai Havi v'Samei b'Shmoi v'Kuras le bris lo lezari adolim shneim v'hem b'Hashem v'yachshaveh lo tzedakah. There, that's where God created a bris with Avraham Avinu. So of course, everyone knows that. That's in the pasuk. Avraham Avinu made a bris with Hashem. The bris is through or via or by knowing these words, not working through this work of Sefer Yetzirah. And then the Sefer Yetzirah says, "V'koras lebris ben eser etzbos yodav v'bris loshen." Sorry, ben eser etzbos ragli v'bris mila. V'koras lebris ben eser etzbos yodav v'bris loshen. Then it says he tied 22 letters in his tongue, and goes on to say what he did with the 22 letters in his mouth or in his speech. Now, in this piece of Sefer Yetzirah in Perek Vav, brings back the second bris to the first bris. Now, we're going back to our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said there's 10 spheres, 5 and 5, right? These are the 5 of the hand, or maybe also the 5 of the feet, as it says in the last Mishnah, right? But there's a bris ben eser etzbos yodav ben eser etzbos raglav, and we're assuming there's very reasonable to assume that that's some sort of elaboration or interpretation of what it says in Perek Aleph. There's chamesh k'neged chamesh, v'ris yochid mechavenes be'emtza, b'milas loshen or kimilas loshen or kimilas mor. So there's 2. In other words, there's really 2 sets of 5 and 5, and each one, the loshen and the mor, which we assume to be the bris milah, are going to be the bris. Now, what I'm getting at really with this bris is that what this means, what this seems to mean, is that there is some connection between the bris in the sense of the deal made between the person who is knowing and the things that he's knowing, and the whatever this exactly means, a bris existing between 5 and 5, between the 5 fingers of the right hand and the 5 fingers of the left hand, or between the 5 fingers of the right foot and the 5 fingers of the left foot, right? These seem to be related in some way, or not maybe we would say by seeing from his own body, Avraham Avinu, from reading the 10 fingers and understanding them, and understanding would work through the mouth, which is where we get 22 letters, as the Sefer Yetzirah says in later prakim, the 22 letters kavam bepeh, they exist in the mouth. Now, the exact relation between 22 letters and the 10 spheres, I still don't know, but that's what the world comes out of, and another way it comes out of the bris, which is also 22 letters. So this is the bris that is in middle. So there's like a bris in middle, which maybe the bris is that talking about the 10 spheres, which is in the middle, in between the 5 and 5. That is the if we put together these two different mentions of bris and the Sefer Yetzirah, and understand that in the second one it's talking about a certain action, and actually in the first perek also there's a bris that talks about this, and then we see that in the perek Kai it connects these both, and it says that the bris of Avraham Avinu between God and him, or between the 10 spheres and him, or between this knowledge and him, was also revealed, was given to him ben eser etzbos yodav ben eser etzbos raglav, kores lebris ben eser etzbos yodav ben eser etzbos raglav. We can understand both the technical meaning of these 2 brises that are mentioned here in Mishnah Gimel, and the more meaning, what are we doing with this? Maybe this is really preparing us for what it says over there. Okay, so that's anyways, that's my pshat. I'm sorry, I'm not just trying to not so much trying to give my own pshat, but more trying to give us a picture of what's going on in the original text, so we can understand where we're going here, right? Now, the Ramak, and as many earlier Mekabbalim before him and after him, have understood this as being based on another whole discussion. So, what does he think? So, the Ramak thinks, now after we decided what the 5 and 5 are, we have to understand what the thing in the middle is, right? So now he has an idea which is called machria. Now, what exactly machria is? There's a whole shar, and shar, which number is I forget. Shar in the ninth shar, which they talk about the concept of hachra'a. Now, I think there's a lot to talk about this concept, so we're not going to be able to. Of course, we're going to get to that shot in itself, but just the most basic would should have at least a picture of it, right? Right. We're still working just with the frameworks, and the meaning is another whole level of thought. But the basic picture of this, in the basic way, and this is actually idea that's in Sefer Yetzirah also, and later it talks about Ma'im Esh and something being Machriya, and also the Lushan, by the way, Chak Lushan Machriya, Kav Zechuz v'Kav Chayva Chak Lushan Machriya. So with another time of seeing Lushan being something Machriya. So again, this does seem to have some precedent or some space to hang it on, at least in the language of Sefer Yetzirah. And what do we understand in general from the Sefer Yetzirah saying in Perek Gimel, I think, Kaf Zechuz v'Kav Chayva Chak Lushan Machriya. So the idea that they have, and of course, this is only a metaphor because it's really talking about metaphysics or physics or theology. It's really another whole level of thought, but it's analogous to this. Like when we have a Bezdin, and a Bezdin has always three people, and the way that conceptualize the Bezdin very often is one person would say yes, one person would say no, and then the third person is, that's why we have three people, is going to decide as like either one of them, and that's going to be a Rav, 2 against 3, 2 against 1, which is going to give us the psak halach of the Bezdin. But really, and more seriously, in a different way of thinking, the third person's job is to listen to the arguments of both sides and to decide today which side seems to be more relevant to the case in front of us, or which side is closer to the truth, right? So the third person is not just being on one side. That's the important point, idea of being a machria. It's not just being on one side, it's actually listening to both sides and finding what we can call sometimes a mediation, right? Something that makes, at least in a certain sense, he actually had understood the argument of the second side, and now taking that into account, he creates something that can be halacha lamasa, that can be decided in reality for today, in a way that takes into account the sides. And of course, it's always going to be more on one side. That's why we'll talk about later in the next piece of this about the middles, the machriim, which we could talk about as being the middle. They always have a bias. We call it hataya. I think it means bias. It's always going to be more on one side, because in reality, if one says chai, one says putter, then the third person is going to say chai a putter, right? But if he's doing the job of being a third person, right, then this might not be literally in a bezin, it's just an idea of having like a bezin of 3, then he would be not only being on one side, but taking into account the arguments or the problems or the points that the second side is raising, and creating something that's a third thing, which is really a hachra'a. So that's the basic understanding of hachra'a. So there's like if you have a scale and there's one side and the other side, and there's like a lashon, there's another word for actually the not sure how you call it, the tongue, like the tongue, the piece of the scale in the middle of the old-fashioned scales that have two sides, and you have to balance it, right? You balance the weight against the counterweight, and then who is doing the balancing. So the one doing the balancing is the scale itself, or like this stick in the middle, the stand in the middle, right? So that's another conceptualization for the concept of machria. And of course, if we don't have that, then one pulls this way, one pulls that way, and it just breaks. There's no point. The whole point of having a scale, this is the way they understand the whole world works. And of course, we're not getting into the ideas of scales and all kind of things. Anyways, basic idea of having something in the middle. And what this middle does, like we just said, it both can push to one side, so give a hachra'a, halacha l'maaseh, so to speak. Where do we have to do? What are we going to actually do? And also is what orchestrates the whole structure, right? Because without the hachra'a, there would be nothing going on, right? And the same thing. Now let's talk. If we think about, for example, the 5 hands and 5 hands, they need to be working together, right? If your right hand would have a mind of its own, and the left hand would have a mind of its own, there will be going nowhere, right? So there needs to be something in between, orchestrating them, creating them, making them work together. And sometimes maybe we could visualize it or imagine it as the right hand does want to go to the right and left hand does want to go to the left, and there's going to be something in the middle. And these are all metaphors for thinking about, if we talk about midas, hanuga, we'll talk about justice versus compassion, chesed and din, or if we're talking about existence, we could talk about oren. We could talk about a lot of different things, so I'm not going to confuse everyone with everything. But this is the basic thing, okay? So now, according to Kabbalah, and this is already assuming a whole body of knowledge that doesn't say here, so just, we're just going to assume it over here. According to Kabbalah, there is a Now, this very much matches with the human body, so it's sort of easy to conceptualize, right? According to the way they understand the 10 spheres, which is not in Sefer Yetzirah at all. At least no, I don't find it at all, but they assume 10 spheres to be corresponding to the human body. Now, human body, if you sort of put a graph on it, if you sort of cut it up into like boxes, then you would end up with a head, which has, let's call it the first three spheres, Chachma Bina Das, or Kesef Chachma Bina generally for the Ramak. And then you would have the body, which is two sets of three, right? Two hands, right hand and left hand, and the torso, the body, and then 2 feet and the body, or sometimes we say the bris. So this is really why, and this is really why we talk about he's going to sort of skip the bris here, because really, if you think about what orchestrates the 2 feet, it's also going to be again the body. Of course, between the 2 feet, you have a organ which is the bris, which is going. You can sometimes speak at that being the part of the body which is between the 2 feet, and somehow, maybe in even a slightly more metaphorical sense, would be the machria between the two legs, or what connects the two legs. But mostly, according to him and according to the pshat here, for sure, he's going to assume that there is the body, what we call the feres, the third sphere, and the third sphere of the seventh sphere is the thing that makes everything work together. So now, forget about the 2 fingers, right? Sort of forget about the 2 hands of 2 fingers. Think about 10 spheres not as existing only in the 10 fingers, but as existing in the entire body, right? This is the structure that he's assuming here. I know that he just does that, but that's what he's doing. And then we understand that bris, there's es spheres, lima misbres that it's just about the number, chamesh keneged chamesh, meaning there's 5. Let's say right now there's 5 higher ones and 5 lower ones. So bris yachid mechavenes be'emtza. So what does the bris yachid do? It connects the 5 higher ones with the 5 lower ones. Now, this is really what is needed to say, right? Because we don't have right and left in this pshat. This pshat, we still don't know anything about right and left. We're not counting the 5 and 5. So the 5 and 5 are still what the earlier Mekabelim said. The 5 and 5 would be Kesef Chachma Bina, which are in the head. Chesed Gvura, which are the 2 hands, right? And the Feres, which is the 5th, which is the body. And then Netzach Yisod Malchus. The Veres would start the body, and then the Veres Netzach Yisod Malchus are the bottom 5, which are the bottom half of the body, so to speak, right? Now, according to him, this is something interesting, but this is to him answers a question, right? If you remember going back, one of his questions on the Mishnah was that the Mishnah seems to say that there are 11, and later it says Eseve Chadesra, which is the name of his Halshan, and it bothers him. Of course, I don't know about Pshat. Let's skip out thinking about Pshat and his way of thinking. This can't work, right? If there's 5 and 5 and something in the middle, so then there's 11. Just count. You end up with 11, right? So therefore, his understanding is going to be that here we're dropping the 5 being really the 5 fingers. The 5 become the regular 5 and 10 spheres, which are the entire body. And now the thing in the middle is actually one of them. The bris yochid mechavenes be'emtza is not another thing in the middle. I don't think this works in Pshat, because the Sefer Yetzirah uses language of mechaven be'emtza many more times, a few more times. It's always another thing. But anyways, or it might be part of these numbers, but it's always a added entity. But any case, according to him, and especially the Pshat is the fingers, and suddenly he skips the fingers. I don't know how you're supposed to read the Sefer Yetzirah in his way of reading, but he's assuming the Zohar's way of reading Sfiris, which is obviously this way, which has and according to Zohar, there's really no 11th, and in this way of thinking, at least, there is only the Machriya Be'emtza is really one of them. So really the 5th, the 6th Sfira, right? 6th Sfira is itself the Bris Yachid, that's Mechaven Be'emtza, and it's actually almost itself the second Bris, and it's what connects the top and the bottom, and also right and left, but mostly the top and the bottom. This is what we're talking about. So I'm just going to read what he says, so we have slightly understand what is going on. I hope that it's clarified more or less what's going on. It says, Al derech HaPirzel, we'll explain the Mishnah. Kiat Feres, Hu Bris Yachid, Ha'ila Ma'ala Ma'ala B'Sida Das. Okay, skip this word for a second, but what he has to get is that Feres, we don't have to talk about the Das for now. We can just say that Feres is what holds up the head, right? The body is what holds up the head, the torso, right? Is what holds up your head, and so connects to it's itself called Das, according to him. So touches Chachma and Bina, which are in the mind. So this is really the central organ of the body. I mean, the central, at least for the body, at least in the sense of a body being able to work, the central organ is going to be the body or the torso, and that is what and for him means connect the top and the bottom parts, right? So it gets some shefa. We could talk about it. Goes up to the chachma bina and gets something from them. Is even machriya between them, but we're not talking about this. And then is machriya between the two hands, right? It sides between or mediates between the right hand and the left hand, and also brings the shefa of the mind or the chachma and bina down to the two legs and to the side and the malchus, which whoever the malchus exactly is in this picture. Reiki bris yichud, v'meles lashon, v'meles moim, mechavenes be'emtza, mean be'emtza what? Be'emtza eseretz bois ha'elyonim, ha'machriya teferes. I don't know what he's saying, be'emtza ha'eseretz bois ha'elyonim. Really, he just said it means to be be'emtza. So I don't know how the emtza, what he's doing here. Because according to what he says, he should be saying, bena, it's bois, it's not between what he wants, what he means to say is like this. What he really means to say is that, so again, you have to remember the two languages of 10. There's 10 fingers, which have also 10 etzpios tachtonim, which he thinks is about the fingers of the feet. But skip that and assume that the whole fingers of the hand are symbolizing an entire body, right? So the whole thing is eseret spiris al yanim. So between the higher ones, the 5 top ones and 5 lower ones, the teferes, which is bris, is machriya, right? Now, what does bris mean? Why is this called bris? So it says bris yochid means krita v'chaticha, right? I don't know why he wants about. According to him, bris. Maybe this is what he means to say. I'm not sure, because what he wants to get is the bris meaning connection or connection. I think communication or communion of connection, really. Right, and he wants to say he thinks that bris is about cutting. I don't think that's true. There's kritat brit, means you cut something for a bris, or cut a bris is the verb that gets connected to the term bris. But I don't think bris means chaticha. I don't know where he got this idea. Kritat bris means that, but not bris doesn't mean that. Bris literally means a covenant, or maybe you would say contract or agreement, something like that. But in any case, it's not important for him. So a bris is the kesher adov, right? The connection between the things. That's what a bris is. So according to him, that's why the bris, it's what connects the top part and the bottom part. And then he talks about what does yichud mean. So this is, again, his pshat. I don't think this is the literal pshat. I have to go back. I think what the Sefer Yitzir says there's 5 and 5, and then there's 1. That's what bris yichud means. If it says yichud, then for sure it means 5 and 5 and 1. So you'll ask a question that there's 11. That's a good question, but there might be another answer to that question. Maybe it's a good question, maybe not. But I don't think the Sefer Yitzir we could misread what it says. But according to him, there's the two different versions. Some say yichud, some say yichud. But in any case, it's the same thing for him. So the bris is what makes them all one. So either yichud, so unifies them, or yichud as in one, but the one for him is not the bris, because it's not 1 plus 10, it's the oneer of everything. So they mean the same thing. So basically, he's got his yichud. That's how I would say it. If there's a difference in yichud and yichud, then he's got his one. Or he says it, you could say that it says yichud, but it means yichud. Anyway, the same thing, okay? So that's his shot. And then he says, some Farshim said that Lashon is bina, but things is the teferes. Now that's really the Ravid's understanding. I've quoted it here. Let me see if I have the language for a second. Bris Yochid, just want to show you. Bris Yochid, the Ravid over here said, the Chumash, na bina shi ke'en haloshin bepesh metziyim ashel machshuv kana bina machras ben ol mash ma'ale ben ol mash metachas likim kabeles ben lema'ale. So how does that the middle? So he says something different, really, according to this pshat bina. So now, just not sure why he's confusing us, because the pshat of bina being the machriya is really saying something very different. It's going to say that that's the Ravid pshat. I see. The Ravid pshat actually has the machriya being between the top 5. There's 2 machriyim, right? And he doesn't have the whole idea of the 10 fingers of the feet, which the Ramak brought in here. Going to the Ravid pshat, just to remember, the Ravid pshat is that there's 5 and 5. Right? Remember, he's the one that thinks that 5 are for higher level and the other 5 are lahanig alyanim, lahanig tachtanim. And then in between those 5, between the upper 5, there's something that's machriya. In other words, that's something that brings things, the way he says it, from thought to action, or from koyach al poil, right? And he says, obviously, ben chomesh lemata, right? Between the netzach and the hoid, right? Between the 2 legs, there's the bris, which gives something out, right? It's just like the organ of reproduction, so you can reproduce by the bris. And the bina, he says it's like the lashon because it's really between the chachma and the bina. But between chachma bina or kesef chachma bina and also gedula gvira, the bina is machria, and bina is called lashon. Why? Because it's like a tongue. What does a tongue do? It creates speech. So it takes your thoughts and makes them into something more real, something more material. In the same way, like as the bris does for even more material level. But the same thing the bina does that. So that's the Ravid's pshat. Because his pshat is not that it's being machri between the two fives, right? He doesn't have this whole idea. The Ramak needs that because for him, that's what makes the two fives into a coherent set of 10. The Ravid doesn't have this problem. He doesn't actually think that there's a whole question of 10 and 20 because he has a different answer to that question entirely. And he thinks that the machriya is going to be 2 within those 10. So it doesn't add an 11th to them, but he does think that the two machrim are between the upper 5 in between themselves and the lower 5 in between themselves. And according to that, the Bris Halushin is the higher one, which is the Bina, so the third Sfira in that order. And the lower one is the same thing as the third Sfira in the lower order, which is the Yisod. Well, it's the fourth Sfira technically because we start on the Feres. But anyways, that's the Rav's Pshat. The Ramak doesn't agree with this Pshat. For the Ramak, the Bris Yachid over here is the Teferes itself and not the Bina. Now, there's a problem. And this problem, I hope everyone is going to keep up with what's going on here, but this is what he does. There's a problem with this pshat. What's the problem with this pshat? Now, for the Ramak, for the Rav, there's no problem because Lushan is bina, and he doesn't actually say Lushan means bina. He says that the bina does the same function as the Lushan, right? I don't think he really literally associates the tongue with bina. Maybe he does in another context, but here at least that's not what he says. But for the Ramak, there's rules. Now, he has a question. What does this mean? The Ramak has rules, and there's a whole shah called Erkei Akanim. And the Ramak, and of course this is, the Shari Oida already works with this way of thinking. I'm not going to make things too complicated here. But there's rules. In other words, for the Ramak, there are words. No. The Zohar, and the Shari Oida and the other Makbul, when they interpreted the Torah, they created a dictionary, basically. Right? They said, there are 10 spheres, and the real names of the 10 spheres, so the technical names are Kesef, Chachma, Bina, Chesed, Gvura, Teferes, Netzach, Yesod, Malchus. These are the names. These are the things that we talk about. They're technical or professional names, we can call them. But of course, they're not in the Torah. There's maybe one pasuk that says L'cha Hashem Magdila v'Agvira, which we get the 7th lower, and there's another pasuk that says Chachma, Bina, V'Das. Okay, these are psukim. We'll see at the end of this shah. But generally, that's the only time we could find this order in the Torah. So what do they say? They say, and there's something called kinuim, and the kinuim is something that Ramak explains at length in Shara Kinuim, why exactly it works like this, so it's not a subject for today. But halacha l'maaseh, what this means is that there's a certain dictionary, and if you're a makubal that wants to interpret the Torah, you have to look up every word in this dictionary. What does Shema Yisrael mean? So look up, Shema means this, Yisrael means that, so now you can start to interpret what this pasuk is saying according to Kabbalah, right? And there's certain rules. They can't, of course, these rules are very complex, and the Ramak himself notices, sometimes you have the same word meaning different spheres. Okay, we have to sort this out. Anyways, for him, there must be rules, and there must be basic logic of how words mean different spheres. Anyways, this is how Torah works. And not only the Torah works like this, but the Zohar itself works like this, right? So just like there are certain, some of them are the same, maybe some of them are different. The Zohar itself, most of the time, also doesn't say Kesef Chacham Bina. Sometimes he does, but most of the time doesn't. He also has Kinuyim, he has different, we can call them nicknames. There are certain pen names, certain terms that he associates with Sfiris. And when he says, for example, Ilon, he means the Feres. When he says Nahar, he means Bina, and so on. Different, of course, he interprets the psukim like this also, but this is the basics. So if you want to interpret Zohar, you need to sort of know more or less this dictionary and read everything in light of that dictionary. And the Ramak is assuming here, and I think this is a very big assumption to make. Of course, I'm just making things clear. I'm not here to argue with him, just making clear what the assumptions are. And if you want to argue, or if there's another pshat, then where the other pshat would come from. The Ramak here is assuming an assumption. He's making an assumption. The Sefer Yetzirah uses the same language as the Zohar. Of course, there's at least some truth in that because the Sefer Yetzirah is before the Zohar, so the Zohar probably inherited some language from the Sefer Yetzirah. But it's not clear to me that it also goes backwards, that we could ask on the Sefer Yetzirah, we should read the Sefer Yetzirah in light of the Zohar's terminology. I don't know if that's correct, but at least he obviously assumes this like this. He never has this kind of thing that, this is a later, maybe sometimes, but most of the time he just assumes that his language is the language that everyone ever spoke. So now we have a problem, because Lashain, anyone that read Zohar, and we could look in Erkei Akanim about Lashain, it says over there, and Lashain means Bina. Lashain doesn't mean Teferes. So if it says Bris Lashain, Bris Moir, we know is the sides. We'll get to that. even that is not, he's not going to take literal right now. But Lashon, it means Teferes, and if you look in Shar, I'm going to look right now. In Shar Kekenim, there must be an entry for this, and it says Lashon Yabina, right? And he actually brings really sources for that and so on. But anyways, maybe sometimes the Malchus, but mostly Lashon is Bina. So then, how could it be? So that Ravid is right, that Lashon must be Bina, right? So it's not Teferes. How does he want to say Teferes? So he comes up with this shtickle Torah. And this is something that Ramak does often. Makes a lot of ekimtas like this. And he says, we have to be medaik each word. And that's his method for being medaik every word. He's going to say, for example, later, there's a difference. Darizal also inherits this from the Ramak and sometimes says things like this. It says Bina, but no, you have to read the exact word. If it says Misitra de Bina, it's not the same thing as saying Bina itself, and so on. So he's going to say, what he says here, it's that it doesn't say Lashon, right? It says Milas Lashon. Of course, what does Milas Lashon mean? And Pshat Sefer Yetzirah is very not clear. Mila seems to be associated with the double meaning of Mila, right? Mila is a word, and Mila is Brit Mila. So that's what I think the Pshat of the Sefer Yetzirah is. But to him, Mila means the word, right? The word of the Lashon. Milas Lashon is a weird conjugation. The word of the tongue. I don't know exactly. I never heard of anyone speaking this way. But that's the simple meaning of Sefer Yetzirah. Still, Milas Lashon, Milas Lashon, the word of the tongue. So he says, this is not the Lashon. Sefer Yetzirah is not saying that the bris between the machria, which is his shot of bris, right? The Sefer Yetzirah doesn't say the word machria here. He's just assuming that, and it is in Sefer Yetzirah later. And the bris that says here is the tongue. It's not the tongue. It's bris yochid mechavenes b'milas lashon. It's the word of the tongue. It's not the tongue itself. So now we could say that there's a tongue, and I'm asking tongue is bina, but the word of the tongue is the feres. That's his chilt, his shtickle toy. That's his akimta, and that's how we could make lashon meaning teferes. Now, how exactly do we do that? So for this, we have to know a whole other drish of the Ramak, and I've copied it in the bottom. I think that's what he's referring to. Maybe there's other places where he says this. He says like this. So what is lashon? Milas lashon. What's lashon? What comes out of a mouth? And this is actually a very interesting. This is very interesting because this is actually an idea of the Sefer Yetzirah and later Parakim, which the Zohar interprets in its own way, in light of its own ideas. Maybe that's the pshat. Maybe it's not the pshat. And the Ramak is going to assume that whole thing and read that into here. He says like this. Milas Lashon is the word that comes out of the Bina. In other words, he's going to say this is all for him, just for him to be able to say that Milas Lashon is the Teferes, which is the Machriya between the upper and lower levels of the body, so the upper lower levels of the Spheres. And he has a problem that Lashon is not Bina, so Lashon is Teferes. Milas Lashon is Teferes, although Lashon is Bina. He said, how? And he's going to show you a very nice, if you have the picture in your mind, you'll see that it works very nicely. He says, out of a mouth comes out two things, koil and dibber, right? So there's the voice, sound, and speech. Sound and speech are two different things, right? You could make noise without having words, you could say ah or something like that, just scream, and you could make that into words. And Sefer Yetzirah talks about this later. It actually has 3 levels, which are koil, ruach, dibber. So there's wind, and there's sound, and there's speech or words, and he says, so the koil and dibber, so he's going to have 2 levels for now, coming out of the lashon. It's lema alidei lashon. So the tongue creates these 2 things called koil and dibber. So according to Kabbalah, basically, just so you know, koil is the teferes, the zah, and dibber is the malchus, and these both are the children of Bina. So the hey, Rishayna of the Shem, for example, is called lashon, and she gives out koil v'dibber. The Zohar says every time you say a word, yishtei mechaven, that your koil is your mouth is the Bina, and she's giving birth to Teferes HaMalchus, which are Havai and Adna, or okay, that's the that's the general understanding of Tikkun Zohar and so on. Now there's another even more detail here. Koil is kolal. Koil in koil is created out of or includes esh ma'im and ruach. How does Mefersim? If you read Tikkun Zohar, you'll know about this. The esh ma'im ruach are actually from the Sefer Yetzirah. Sefer Yetzirah talks about esh ma'im ruach as being the 3 yesodot of the world. So he has not 4 yesodos as we're used to from classical philosophy or classical Greek. The Sefer Yetzirah actually has 3 yesodos, and he skips the yesod afa. So he has 3 yesodos, which are Ma'im, Esh, and Ruach. So the three out of the 4 classical yesodos, the Mefarshim are all assume that there must be 4, all ask this question, but Al Pi Pshat, he just has 3. Anyways, now the Zohar read this in a non-literal way, and he said that koil is teferes, and the Sefer Yetzirah itself says that when the person speaks, in the speech, there is these all three yisodos, maybe in like a microcosm way, right? So the entire world might be made out of fire, water, and air. These are the three yisodos. And the same thing when a person speaks, he has fire, water, and air. Well, fire, water, and air also exist in a person's body. So there's in the microcosm of the person, and even in the microcosm of only your speech can include. Then that's all goes back to the image of God creating the entire world with His speech. So if God's speech is the whole world, which has fire, water, and air, so even in every person's speech has fire, water, and air. Right now, what are the fire, water, and air in a person's speech? At least the Ramak explains it like this: that when you speak, there is in your speech and the words that you say, there's always going to be at least three things. You could talk about certain wetness of the speech, right? There's some particles of water or whatever saliva that come out when you speak. That's the mayim, that's the water. And then there's wind, obviously. You need air to come out of your mouth to speak. And there's heat, right? So you speak, there's the air that comes out of your mouth when you speak is warm air, it's not cold air. So there's heat in it, right? That's at least how they conceptualize. So there must be heat in it. So there's in every word there is heat, water, and air. So koil, sound, and this is even before the dibber, right? The words would be a fourth thing, right? Because even if I just say I already have in my sound fire, water, and air. Okay. Now fire, water, and air in the spheres of the Zohar, and the Zohar spheres mean what? Obviously, these associations are pretty simple. Water is chesed, fire, right? Water is calm, it's chesed. Fire is fire, it's gevura, and air, which is sort of in between of them, is teferes, right? So in other words, out of if we just said that there's coil is teferes, not teferes in general is the part that we can include all other 5 or 6 spheres. The rest of the spheres are all part of the teferes in a certain sense. So we could talk, and it comes out of bina, right? The mother, which is the mother of the spheres, or well, the tongue, it doesn't really work, but the bina called the tongue, and creates, just like in your mouth, there's in the voice that you give out, there's 3, and there's the power of these 3 spheres, which are chesed in the water, gevura in the fire, and mayim in the teferes itself, which is itself the koil. So the teferes, these 3 parts of the teferes are themselves mayim esh roach, v'hem shlish b'chinas teferes kihiya machria. So that therefore the coil that comes out of the bina is 3 chesed, right? So therefore, this is to finish his answer. We're not talking about the tongue, because the tongue would be an 11th. There's 10 fingers and the tongue. No, we're talking about speech, which something comes out of bina really means just the same teferes, which when it creates speech is going to put these 3 parts into the so this the sound, which means teferes when it goes up to bina or comes out of bina, which is the lushan, or another word we can call it shofar. So this is just random. We don't no need for this, but just like shofar is another term for bina, and just like a shofar creates sound, so why shofar is a term for bina is not for now, but it's a similar idea, right? Just like the person's tongue is going to be the one that creates sound, we could also call it a shofar, which creates sound. And out of the shofar comes chesed, gevura, teferes, right? So if you read Zohar in Rosh Hashanah, anyone that read the Zohar and that's printed in the Seder before the shofar sees that it says that Avram, Yitzchok, and Yaakov are coming out of the shofar, and this just means this ice, fire, water, and air, which come out of the shofar. They literally do, and they're symbolized Avram, Yitzchok, Yaakov, which symbolize chesed, gevura, teferes coming out of bina. That's the kavanah of shofar. Okay. Anyways, that's the teferes, which comes from the first Gimel Shainis. So Bina is the third of the first 3 spheres. In other words, she's the one giving out or giving birth to the Teferes, which comes out of them, and therefore is machria between the right and left. That's the coil, which is including its right, left, and middle, and then connects them to the feet, and by doing this connects the upper part of the spheres and the lower part of the spheres. So that's the pshat of Milas Lushan, and Milas Moir is again the same thing, but according to him, I don't know what he's doing here. I do not know what he's doing here. He says Milas Moir is the bris milah, and this is the pshat that most Mefarshim have. Moir means like kamar ish levayas as a pasuk, and the Chazal at least understand this mean kamar as kechiber ish malevayas shlesh and kaiva kamar. So Lishan erva, I think. I'm not sure, but I think it's Lishan erva. So you put your erva into the woman. That's kamar. So mar is bris ma'oir, the bris which gets ma'oired or gets maybe it means stick. I'm not sure not sure exactly how this is supposed to be read in the diktuk. Anyways, it's talking about the bris milah. And vakavuna yichud asher ben eseret bois raglaim al deha moram yachtam. So what happened now? I don't know. What does this even mean? Earlier he said that Ezra's bois raglaim are talking about the 10 spheres of Elma Bria. So they also have a Bria. So in which sense do they have the Yisod closer to them than the Tferes? I don't know. I have no idea what this Pshat is doing here. He just said that is between the 10 spheres, the top part of the 10 spheres and the bottom part of the 10 spheres. And there's another, now there's 20 spheres, so it's talking about the Elma Bria, like he said. And there's a Milas Moira Miyachdam. I don't know what's going on in this part of the Pshat. Maybe we could find in other places, maybe it makes it clearer. But for now, I don't understand this Pshat. Although it's true that this is the simple Pshat of the Mishnah. And it says, like he says, and he quotes the Mishnah in Perek Vav, Peresh Zamichrach, like that this part, that the bris loshen is the one that's supposed to be associated with the 5 hands, and the bris moed is associated with 10 feet, is literally in the last mission of Sefer Yetzirah. In the 6th parak, it says, Kras lebris ben esretz boes raglav, she bris mila, ben esretz boes yodav, bris loshen. So over there it says bris mila, it doesn't say the word bris moed, but we're assuming that if the second part of this pier, loshen, is mila, so moed must be another word for mila. Why does it say mila and here not moed? I don't know. Maybe that's a raya that is not the right pshat, but that's how he understands it. But I don't know how he understands this second machriya and why would it be the bris. I don't know how it's supposed to work according to his pshat. But anyways, this is his pshat of explaining the Mishnah in the way, according to the Perish and Mefarshim, that it's the 5 tap. And just like we said, this is not those Mefarshim's pshat, right? So he's modifying their pshat. Their pshat was that there's 5 and 5, and there's a machriya between those 5 and the machriya between the bottom 5. And his pshat is that the machriya is between the 5 and 5 of the 10 tap, and then there's another machriya between the 5 and 5 of the bottom tap, which according to what he said earlier is the spheres of El Mabriya, but I'm not sure how we're supposed to make that work in this Mishnah or even in his pshat. I'm not sure how it works. Maybe if someone knows how it works, they should tell me, because I do not know. I think this is going to be enough for today. Basically, I think this is us finishing the first chapter, right? This is the end of Perek Aleph. So yeah, so we finally finished one chapter of Pardes Rimonim.